Hello everybody. In this video, we're going to be talking about the different research methods that sociologists use to collect data. In the previous video, we looked at the different kinds of data that we wanted to get. Talked about the importance that the data that we collect is reliable and valid. Well, these are the different ways that data is collected. There's four primary ways that data gets collected for sociological research. They are by conducting experiments, by distributing surveys, by doing participant observations, and by examining existing sources. Now, there's different circumstances where different ones of these research methods are going to be used best, but one is not inherently better than the other. Okay, first, let's look at experiments. An experiment is a research method where the sociologist can collect data in a controlled environment. They can control all aspects of what happens within the experiment. So for instance, if I had a very basic sociological question about how female students at Waubonsee feel when they are propositioned by male students at Waubonsee, I likely wouldn't, but I could set up an experiment to try to answer this question. In doing this, I would set up a classroom which was running a fake kind of class. I would hire a bunch of actors to come in. There'd be an actor to represent the instructor. There'd be actors to represent the students in the class. And one at a time, I would bring in the study participants, which would be female students at Waubonsee who had volunteered to take part in a sociological study. They wouldn't really know what it was about, but knew that they would be taking part in a study. And while they were in the classroom, one of my hired actors would proposition the female student. Afterwards, I could ask her how she felt about that, what her reactions were, and I could do that again and again and again with different participants and eventually have enough data to answer my question. If I wasn't getting the kind of results that I wanted, I could change anything about it. I could change how many people were in the class. I could change what the proposition is. I could change where the female student sits or how far away she is from the guy who's going to proposition her, right? I have the ability as the researcher, and in an experiment, I have the ability to change everything around, right? It's happening in a controlled environment that I control, right? This is how you would conduct an experiment. Another way is by doing survey research. And you may have already participated in a sociological survey and maybe you didn't even know it. If you've ever filled out one of those postcards or fill out one of those surveys where it asks you your household income, the range of your age, the range of your educational level, right? This was collecting sociological data. That's demographic data that they use to make observations about different groups of people. So if I wanted to ask that same question, how female students at Waubonsee feel, I could distribute a survey to a random selection, and it's very important that it's random. I could distribute a survey to a random selection of female students at Waubonsee and ask them questions. Have you ever been propositioned by a male student at Waubonsee? How did you feel about that? Was it a pleasant experience, 1 through 10? Was it negative experience, 1 through 10? And so on and so forth. And then after I've collected up enough of those, I could potentially answer my question. Okay? So looking at experiments and survey research, there is also participant observation. This is another way that you can answer sociological questions. This is by observing the subjects of your study in their natural environment. So if I wanted to conduct that same research study about how female Waubonsee students feel, maybe I go and just sit in classes around campus and wait for these interactions to happen naturally, right? And then after they do, introduce myself, I am studying, I would like to ask you about the interaction you just had with that other student. How did that make you feel? I could do that enough times and get the data that I wanted in order to answer my sociological research question, okay? There are some types of studies, though, again, as I said in the beginning, where one of these research methods is more appropriate than another. For instance, I would not do the study on how female students feel with an experiment. It would probably be done with a survey or with a participant observation. But what if I had a question, and this was a real question in a real study that was done, what if I had a question about what it's like to sell crack? That's a strange kind of question. and one that you'd have to create a particular type of way to gather that information, right? If I wanted to do an experiment, I couldn't set up like a fake street corner and invite a bunch of crack dealers there and sell crack on my fake street corner to my hired actor crackheads, and you sell them crack and then I talk to you about it afterwards. That's not going to work. How about I go down to the neighborhoods where crack is often sold and I start handing out surveys. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Crack Dealer, I'm studying crack. Would you mind filling out this survey of what it's like to sell crack? Might get punched in the face. Who knows, right? Instead, the person who actually did this did a participant observation. And what this person did was they went into Baltimore in a neighborhood where there was a lot of drug dealing activity and befriended a couple of low-level street crack dealers. And he spent the next couple years hanging out with those guys, learning about them, learning about their day-to-day life, what it's like, why they do it, what their wants are, what their ambitions are, what their fears are, and all these kinds of questions. And this study was really remarkable in that it really challenged the common conceptions that people had about who and what crack dealers were. It was very, very revealing. And I'll talk more about the crack dealer study in later chapters that we do, but it was his work that became some of the source material for a very famous television show on HBO called The Wire that you might have seen. It was his work that helped contribute to that. The last of the research methods that we're going to talk about, but the one that you should most definitely do first, is using existing sources, okay? Before you go designing an experiment or writing out a survey or planning to go somewhere where there might be crack dealers that you can study, look to see what kind of data has already been collected. There are organizations and institutions that are collecting data all the time. When you filled out your application to go to Wabansi, they collected data on you. The United States government collects data every 10 years through the census and at periods of time in between. Different schools, different nonprofits, different businesses, lots of people are collecting data all the time, all the time. So if you have access to that data, it might not have been collected to answer your specific question, but the answer to your question might be there. If you use some data from this source and some data from that source, you might be able to put those things together and then get the answer that you're looking for and that you really need. Okay? So before you go doing anything else, the very first thing a sociologist should do if they're interested in studying something is by looking at the sources that are already there. All right? So these are the different research methods. We have an experiment, conducting survey research, participant observation, and using existing sources. If you have any questions or feedback or comments, I'd appreciate you leave them in the comments section below. And there'll be more videos on theory and theoretical perspectives.